In 1934, a farm woman in rural Georgia fed her family of 8 through the worst drought in a decade. She had no refrigerator, no electricity, no government assistance. She had a root cellar, a smokehouse, a crock of salt, and knowledge that had been passed down for 6 generations. Every single person in that household stayed healthy all winter. Today, 11 of the 15 methods she used are illegal to sell under federal food law. The FDA didn't ban them because they failed. They banned them because they couldn't be inspected, documented, or taxed. Number 8 on this list was consumed safely by millions of Americans for 200 years before a single government form existed to regulate it. Number 3 was outlawed after a study that scientists have disputed for 50 years. And number 1, one state made it a criminal offense in 1987. Not because anyone got sick, because the paperwork didn't exist. Hit subscribe. These are the 15 Depression-era food preservation tricks the FDA made illegal after 1970, and why your grandparents never got sick from any of them. Number 15. Dry salting meat directly on the wood plank. Before waxed paper, before plastic wrap, Depression-era families pressed thick cuts of pork directly onto salted hardwood boards and left them in the cool of the cellar for weeks. The salt drew moisture out. The wood absorbed the brine. The meat cured slowly and evenly without a single piece of equipment. A family in the Carolinas could preserve 40 pounds of pork this way for under $1 of salt. Today, FDA food code prohibits the curing of meat on any unsealed, porous surface. The wood plank that preserved a century of American winters is now a sanitation violation. Number 14. Burying eggs in water glass. Sodium silicate, called water glass, was sold at every hardware store in America through the 1940s. You filled a ceramic crock with a diluted solution, submerged fresh eggs pointy end down, and sealed them in. The silicate coated every pore of the shell, blocking oxygen and bacteria. Eggs preserved this way lasted 10 to 12 months without refrigeration and came out perfectly edible. A dozen eggs cost 12 cents in 1935. The water glass cost 15 cents and preserved 50 eggs. No one got sick. The method worked so well that the USDA actually recommended it during both World Wars. Today it is unclassified, not illegal exactly, but no commercial operation can use it without documentation that doesn't exist for this technique. The knowledge quietly died when refrigerators arrived. Number 13. Lard sealing, covering cooked meat in rendered fat. After frying pork chops or sausage, grandmothers poured the hot lard directly over the meat in a stone crock, sealing the surface completely as it cooled. No air, no bacteria, no spoilage. Meat preserved this way lasted months in a cool cellar without a single case of illness recorded in any community that practiced it. The technique was common from Appalachia to the Texas Hill Country. Selling any meat product preserved this way is now illegal under USDA. Number 12. Open-air jerky drying on fence wire. Thin strips of venison or beef, rubbed with salt and sometimes a little black pepper, hung across fence wire or wooden racks in the open air for 3 to 5 days. The dry wind and sun did the work. Mountain families called it wind beef. It kept for months in a cloth sack and traveled in a shirt pocket. The salt and low moisture created an environment hostile to bacteria. Today, the USDA requires jerky to reach an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit using a controlled heat source with documented time and temperature logs. Selling open-air dry jerky is illegal in all 50 states. The fence wire still stands. Nobody hangs meat on it anymore. Here is what the regulation books never mention. The people who used these methods were not reckless. They were precise. They knew exactly how much salt to use because their mothers had taught them, and their mothers' mothers before that. They knew by touch when the cure had taken. They knew by smell when something had gone wrong. 6 generations of unwritten food science, passed hand to hand across kitchen tables, was replaced by paperwork that no grandmother could fill out and no federal inspector could issue for a technique learned in a cellar in 1902. The knowledge wasn't wrong. It just wasn't written down in a language the government recognized. Number 11. Root cellaring unpasteurized cider. A barrel of fresh-pressed apple cider left in the root cellar through October and November would slowly ferment into a low-alcohol hard cider that kept all winter without going bad. Families drank it, cooked with it, used the end-stage vinegar for pickling. Not a drop wasted. Selling raw, unpasteurized cider is now illegal in most states without a licensed facility and documented pathogen testing. A small orchard in Vermont was fined $3,000 in 2009 for selling fresh-pressed cider at a roadside stand the way the family had done since 1921. The apples hadn't changed. The law had. Number 10. Smoke-preserving fish on a backyard rack. A fresh-caught catfish, rubbed with salt and hung in a backyard smoker built from an old barrel and hickory scraps, could be preserved for weeks. Families across the Mississippi Delta did this every summer. The smoke deposited phenols on the surface of the fish that actively inhibited bacterial growth. It worked. It worked beautifully. Today, smoking fish for commercial sale requires a licensed hazard analysis and critical control point plan, documented temperature logs, and a certified facility. An 80-year-old man in Louisiana was cited in 2016 for selling smoked catfish at a church fish fry. His family had been doing it since 1944. Number 9. Storing butter under saltwater brine. A ceramic crock filled with heavily salted water, with a pound of fresh butter submerged and weighted below the surface, kept butter fresh for months without refrigeration. The salt brine prevented the growth of any spoilage bacteria. Farmwives across the Midwest used this through the 1950s. The butter that came out tasted slightly saltier and, according to everyone who ate it, considerably richer than anything you buy today. Selling brine-preserved butter without refrigerated storage documentation is a violation of FDA dairy regulations in every state. The taste is gone. The technique is gone. The crock still sits on the shelf, labeled decorative use only. Number 8. Potting meat in rendered tallow. Cooked beef or game meat packed tightly into a clay pot and sealed under an inch of beef tallow. The hard fat rendered from around the kidneys would keep without refrigeration for months. This was standard English and early American practice carried into Depression kitchens because it worked and cost nothing beyond the effort of rendering. The tallow seal was airtight. The meat inside stayed safe. No oxygen meant no aerobic bacteria. Today, this technique cannot be legally used for any commercially sold product under any USDA inspection. Here is what nobody in a regulatory office will say out loud. The foodborne illness rate in the United States has not meaningfully improved since 1970 despite 50 years of expanding federal food law. The CDC estimates 48 million Americans get sick from food every year right now. In 2024, with all regulations fully in place. Your great-grandmother, preserving meat in a lard crock in a dirt floor cellar in 1936, was not the public health crisis. The factory floor processing 400 chickens a minute is where the outbreaks come from. The regulations landed on the wrong kitchen. Here is the thing about every method on this list. Not one of them was invented by someone trying to cut corners. Every single one was invented by someone trying to keep their family alive through a winter with no money, no electricity, and no government to help them. They worked because the people who used them paid attention, respected the process, and passed the knowledge down carefully. The FDA didn't end these practices because they were dangerous. They ended them because they were invisible, because you can't inspect a root cellar from a federal office in Washington. Which one would you bring back? Drop it in the comments. I want to know whether the spring cellar gets more respect than the water glass eggs. And if your grandmother used any method on this list, tell me. That knowledge belongs here. These weren't just food hacks. They were a whole civilization's answer to scarcity. And most of that answer is now sitting in an antique store labeled decorative use only. I know these are only 8. So, make sure you subscribed because we will be exposing next 7 in part 2.